Now we're going to look at some key controls as far as the formation of soil, or what we refer to as pedogenesis. And we'll begin with talking about the parent material. The parent material is definitely the starting point in soil formation. It largely determines the range of texture, i.e., the percentage or composition of sand, silt, and clay that a soil will have. And also its chemical and mineralogical properties, which all together help to relate to the fertility of the soil that is formed. And so parent material is the substance from which a soil originates. And so all soils, just like we all as humans, originate from something. And we originate from two parents. So think of that as parent material is what helps to produce the soil that is formed above it. And so soils could develop on top of sedimentary rock, volcanic ash, sand, loess, glacial till, metamorphic rock, all the various examples I showed on the previous pictures. Um, in terms of characteristics, soils that form on top of limestone and volcanic ash tend to be very fertile soils. And so, of course, in Indiana, with our limestone soil, our underlying bedrock, it's one reason why we do have pretty darn good soils. The sandier soils tend to be the most infertile. And so, as far as getting much agriculture output out of sandier soils, not too high. So they're very infertile. Two characteristics, two different types of soils that are definitely very relevant to Indiana are first off, residual soils, which that's where the parent material is the underlying bedrock. And so the soil was formed from that underlying bedrock. And so the soil that you find there, much of the composition of sand, silts, and clays are from that underlying bedrock weathering away and staying in its place. The other would be transported soil. And transported soil principally is rivers that can transport soil, but in terms of Indiana, really the glaciers, the most recent glacial periods, which help to transport the soil. And so this is where the soil, or the parent material from which the soil originates, keep in mind, has been transported and deposited and placed there. So it's not from that area. It's been picked up, moved, and deposited in that area. And so two distinct types of soils, residual soil and transported soil. So where in Indiana would one find residual soil, and where would one find transported soil? Another key control regarding soil formation is time, and it takes centuries and a millennia to change. And this is very much geological time, very long, 100 to 1,000 years to create just 1 inch of soil. Like I said there. The older soils tend to be less fertile than younger soils. Older soils just mean that they've been there for a long time. And so typically they would be what we would also refer to as residual soils. And so residual soils also tend to be older soils. They've been there for a long time. Younger soils have been recently moved and deposited and transported to a new location. So younger soils tend to be more fertile than older. So where in Indiana would I find younger soil, and where would I find older soil? Climate is also very important in the formation of soil. And so this helps to determine the types of plants and the animals that live there, but also is very integral in the formation generally of soil. The best soils are found in temperate climates with seasonality, climates where it's not so freaking hot and so freaking wet, but also not too dry, not too cold, somewhere there in the middle. And so grasslands and forest lands are typically what we find in those temperate climates, and so these have very rich O and A layers. You don't see as far as the tropical or polar regions having that rich O and A layer. The worst soils would be the tropical climates because of the heavy amounts of precipitation. They get a good amount of leaching. We looked at that as far as an example of that in the Dominican Republic on a previous slide. The worst soils also would be desert climates, and we looked at an example of that as well. And so obviously the dryness, the lack of vegetation, the lack of movement of particles helps to create a very, very poor soil content. And very minimal flora and fauna, and so that's why the O and the A layers are so minimal. Next up is slope. Slope's important as far as the types of soil that will form there. And so think of this as the angle or the gradient. So steeper slopes have very poor developed soils. What happens there is simply the movement of water is much faster, and so that it has more erosive capabilities. And so what happens there is as water removes nutrients from that area, whereas flat areas tend to be less susceptible to erosion, but also water tends to be more spread out and stays at that top layer longer instead of water just quickly being removed from that top layer on a steep slope. Also important is the orientation. Is it facing to the north, the south, the east, or the west? And so the direction the slope is facing influences the soil temperature and the moisture. And so in Brown County, where they have these steep slopes that face north, you see these cluster of these pine trees. And these pine trees like those cooler climates, the lower sun angles that they would find on a north-facing slope, because the sun angle is more intense on the south side, the south slope of those hillsides in Brown County. Somewhat related to climate is climate and vegetation is the role of flora and fauna, or plants and animals, on the composition of the soil below. And so organisms definitely have an influence on a area's soil as they furnish that humus to those top layers. And different vegetation types, as we've shown in those various images, affect soils differently. And so grasslands have a different effect than deciduous forests, which have a different effect on coniferous forests. And also you got bacteria and fungi, which are also very critical to breaking down nutrients and changing the composition of soil. And so they're also very much important. These microorganisms, these smaller, very harder to spot, but definitely have a large and important role. Think about it, earthworms do a very good job of adding pore spaces, of increasing the size of pore spaces, which allows water to move through the soil layers. Also, you get these bacteria and fungi, which break down dead plant material, break it down, and change the composition of the soil as they then secrete that broken down material. And when we compare grasslands to forest lands, grasslands are actually better soils than forest lands. And we'll take a look at this here on the following slide. Grasses on the left, forest on the right. Grasses have a large fibrous root system, which adds large amounts of organic material throughout the upper layers of soil each year. And so you can see a larger A horizon here. So what we have is the roots of these grasses. And what the roots do is they go deep and penetrate deeper below the soil. And so the soils formed under the grasses have a thick, darker colored surface horizon. In contrast, in the forest on the right, leaves fall on the soil surface and add organic matter on top of the mineral soil below. This results in that very thin, dark-colored surface layer of organic material over lighter-colored layers below. And so, taking all of what we've learned, the best soils that we would find in Indiana would be found in this red box here. And so this is a map showing prairie and hardwood forest, prairie being grassland, the rest of the state being primarily hardwood forest as far as native. What would be there if ag wasn't in the way, if humans weren't here. And so this area represents Benton County, Indiana, the best soils in Indiana. Why are they the best? Well, first off, they're young soils. So younger soils better than older soils, and they formed from recent glaciers. So they're transported soils. They're formed in a grassland area. This is a flatter area due to glaciers, so it doesn't have the slope issues, and it also is the driest area in the state, and so it's not going to have a good amount of leaching. It's not going to have a good amount of that organic material leaving those top layers. Therefore, the worst soils in Indiana are found here in Crawford County. So Crawford County has the oldest soils formed from the sedimentary bedrock limestone underneath it. And so because it's been there, it's residual soil, it's old, it hasn't had glaciers come and bring and transport new sediment to the area. It's also a forested area, so comparing forested areas to grasslands. Very rugged topography, so a lot of steep slopes in this area. And as far as precipitation, this area, combined with some of the places up along the lake, get the most amount of precipitation in the year, and so it also is the wettest area in the state, and so it's most prone to leaching, alluviation, and so forth. The answer to